this is Roger Green, host of the Surfing the NASH Tsunami podcast. This weekend, we are offering 5 conversations from Season 3, Episode 36, our review of the July 7 Intercept Pharmaceuticals press release announcing the newly compiled data for obeticholic acid, or OCA, in the treatment of NASH fibrosis. This update includes a reanalysis of efficacy data and a much larger patient pool for analysis of safety data, including almost 1,000 patients who've been taking OCA for 4 years. It also announces Intercept's intention to file a revised new drug application later this year. This concluding conversation asks whether the data in the Regenerate reanalysis is likely to be sufficient to get obeticholic acid approved. The consensus is probably yes. And what it will mean for the entire community of fatty liver stakeholders if it does so. The consensus is a lot, really a lot. Listen for everybody's details and specific comments. With this new press release comes the realistic possibility that the fatty liver community might find ourselves with not 1, but 2 approved medicines by the end of 2023. This would be a remarkable step forward that would create market interest, drive funding for drug development and provider education, and generally create a new, much brighter environment for NAFL diagnosis, treatment, and management. So sit back, listen, enjoy, learn, and when you're done, join the dialogue on our LinkedIn discussion group.
Stephen Harrison.
On July the 7th, 2022, Intercept pressed that they announced positive data in fibrosis due to NASH from a new analysis of its phase 3 Regenerate study of obeticholic acid. And there were 4 top-line bullet points that Intercept wanted to make. And I'm just going to read them, and then we'll talk about specifically some of the data. Number 1, the 25 milligram dose of obeticholic acid met the agreed primary endpoint of improvement in liver fibrosis without worsening of NASH at 18 months. And the p-value was highly significant. It was less than 0.0001. For those of you that aren't counting, that's 3 zeros and a 1. And that was consistent with the original Regenerate analysis. Point 2, the 25 milligram dose of obeticholic acid demonstrated double the response rate in reduction of liver fibrosis without worsening of NASH versus placebo. Number 3, this data set includes larger and more robust safety database of 2,477 patients with nearly 1,000 on study drug for 4 years. Number 4, Intercept to resubmit a new drug application. So they're going to refile an NDA in liver fibrosis due to NASH. A pre-submission meeting with the FDA is scheduled later this month. So there you have it. That's their main bullet points. Now, just to dive into this a little bit, and then I want to, maybe we'll take this section by section. One thing we didn't talk about today was the cirrhotic trial, the reverse trial. That's complete. We haven't seen results from that. I think it would be incredibly important to have the safety tolerability profile of those 900 patients, in addition, because I think that will help us. Because, again, the first FDA-approved treatment for this disease, Jörn, I don't know about you, but there's going to be a lot of well-compensated cirrhotics that are going to want to get put on treatment.
Jörn Schattenberg.
No, I agree. And, that's going to make this a pretty complete data set. It'll be important to be reported out soon, hopefully. And, regarding your comment on the pruritus, I'm convinced there was a high pruritus report in the placebo group. There's something on how you ask and how it's reported that's critical. There will be some discontinuations related to it, but I think, as you rightfully said, it'll be to be taken that first barrier is going to be so important. And with this data here, in particular with the safety data and the extended data set on long-term exposure, raising no new significant issues, this should be revisited, and I'll be very excited to see what comes out of it.
We agree. So I have one experience I don't think any of you have had. Louise referenced this briefly. I have a couple of times on the podcast, which is I've actually discontinued a drug because of pruritus. And by the way, it was a cancer drug. And they were trying to see how many doses they could limp me through. And I finally said, forget it. I just can't do this anymore. But to get to that point, I had to have severe itching over, I'm going to guess 70% of my body 16 hours of the day, at which point I said, listen, I can't do this. I have a hard time envisioning that you would not approve this drug simply because of the pruritus issue. I mean, that's a controllable toxicity, right?
Yeah, I agree. It would be one thing is you stop the medicine and the itching didn't go away.
Yeah, and it'd be one thing if you put a ding in somebody's cardiovascular system in a way that was going to have long-term effects, and you did that often enough. But I can't see it with pruritus.
I think at the end of the day, there are going to be, I'm hopeful that this gets approved second time around. My guess is if you had to hold my feet to the fire, there'll probably be some left and right boundaries around appropriate follow-up of these patients, just kind of like we do with PBC. I think the story is not told until we see the cirrhosis safety and tolerability data.
Yeah, and I agree, and it's about the planning. But if we're not planning now to roll out, because I think it's really exciting, this is one disease area that I just get excited that once these medications go into the real world, we'll actually get better results, because not only you cannot currently, under any trial, place in behavioural therapy into that trial because it would skew the results, quite rightly. But the minute you get to the real world, you have support, you have dietary discussions, you can monitor differently, you can do this. So by adding all of the other things that we know work well within certain populations of this disease, we could see the outcomes of a resolution increase from 25.2% to maybe 30 or 35% by adding that additional effect, but only if it's delivered in the right way, only if it's supported in the right way. We and the industry have battled so long to get this close. If we do not support the rollout of these medications in the right way and the right pathways, we're doing patients a disservice. And the amount of time and effort that we've put in to add that additional support to do that, we could just reap rewards in the real world. I'm expecting real world evidence to be better than the clinical trials in this disease profile.
And just think what it'll do for disease awareness. But I'll end on this note, because I know you're going to go to wrap up in a minute, Roger. A little teaser for when we do come around to the nomenclature debate. If this drug is approved for the treatment of NASH with fibrosis, will it then translate to MASH or MAFLD with fibrosis? Or do they have to go back and do another phase 3 trial? And what does this mean to all the drugs that are currently in phase 2B for a NASH indication? Do they now have to delay their phase 3 trial to go back and do a MAFLD trial? So these are some of the interesting conversations that were spun up at the nomenclature meeting, and I don't pretend to have the answers, but they are very interesting and intriguing questions to discuss.
That's a great point, Stephen. And as I've been reading some of these studies that have come up from time to time that have said if you analyze this based on NASH, you get one result, and based on MASH, you get a different result, or NAFLD and MAFLD. That's been my reaction. It's been so hard to get drugs to the finish line. Why would you do something that risked a redefinition of the work that you'd already done? It just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, if it was easy to get these drugs approved, that would be different. But as we know, it's not. So I'm wholeheartedly with you there. Okay, well, close is real simple, all right? 15 months from now. And we're sitting here because something happened with this drug. What happened? Brave one, go first.
So let's say the favorable long-term safety data has shifted the momentum of the regulators to approve obeticholic acid based on its efficacy on fibrosis resolution, while it did not show that in the cirrhotic population. And thus, we're going to have a drug in a non-cirrhotic population. Now, there was no safety signal from the cirrhotic population that was disconcerting, and we might use FXRs in a selected patient population with non-cirrhotic advanced NASH. Is one option of reading the crystal ball.
Well, sadly, the problem with crystal ball is you only get one read, and then everyone remembers if you blow it. But okay, so that's one. Next.
15 months from now, the field's broader than obeticholic acid, and we have a phase 3 readout on efficacy coming in Q4 from resmetirom. So again, we're just being hypothetical. So let's assume that meets an efficacy endpoint. The safety and tolerability of that drug have been reported already in 1,200 patients. We'll have the additional 900 to 1,000 from the efficacy trial. So let's say they submit a new drug application and both are approved. So in 15 months, we're looking at 2 oral therapies approved to the treatment of non-cirrhotic NASH. That would be huge for the field. That would be a tsunami for NASH. That would be unprecedented and something that all of us have been waiting for the better part, well, at least me, for the better part of 2 decades. Jörn that would take him back to his teenage years, so I'm not sure he was too concerned about NASH as a teenager. But that would be huge, unprecedented. Will that mean that we are done? No. We're not done with NASH just because those two, if we're fortunate enough to have both approved or on the market, we're just getting underway. we're really just getting underway. So what I see in 15 months is a huge groundswell of interest in the field, that needle swinging back towards research dollars coming into the space, disease awareness really, really taking off, and patients actually seeing a positive impact. Again, you're not going to cure everybody, but there will be people that we see significant reductions in liver chemistry tests, liver fat, non-invasive assessment, all things pointing to the fact that these drugs are having an impact. And obviously, it'll take a long time before we see, what that impact is. We know from hepatitis C, where cure rates are now greater than 90%, it comes down to how many of the population are treated and cured before we can begin to see a drop in liver transplantation, drops in the cost of care of this disease as it burdens our society. We still have a long way to go, but my gosh, in 15 months, if we could be there, how great that would be for the field.
Louise Campbell.
And I suppose I was going to say some of those same comments, but I think for me it was the invigoration of the industry in the context that we will have OCA and yes, possibly resmetirom, and rather like boceprevir and telaprevir did for the hepatitis C world, we then get a whole host of drugs and people's interest rises and we start to go out and locate. And I think for me, and where nurses are going to fit in, it's going to be the location of this disease. It's going to be about the comorbidity management and trying to break down the silos, because we're not going to find NASH if we don't break down the silos. If we can locate early fibrosis in our biggest co-diseases, so our type 2 diabetes, our cardiovascular, then we can really make a big fat dent in this super tsunami with this. And I think we'll have too much to discuss on surfing the NASH tsunami in 15 months and then ongoing with real world data. How exciting could that be?
As my people say, from your mouth to God's ears. Stephen, the first time I ever talked in public about this disease, the second comment I made that people remembered was the first drug is whether and the second drug is which. That you really have a market when you have two drugs. And if you're lucky enough to get two drugs with different modes of action, which is virtually never how it works, then you elevate discussion a whole bunch of levels. I was really heartened by this data. I thought, like I said, they set out to present the first thing they presented very conservatively. Here's what we had to prove. We think we proved this. There's a whole, as you point out, Stephen and Jörn and Louise, there's a whole bunch we haven't seen yet that could change our impression on that. But I'm with you. I think that this suggests that we, faster than 2025, which was what people had been thinking a little while ago, we may have two drugs with two different modes of action, both investing in education and commercialization, and that would just be massive.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this conversation or the entire episode, please send an email to questions@surfingnash.com. We'll be back next week with a new episode of Surfing Nash Tsunami to drop on Wednesday, July 20th. Please join us. Until then, stay safe, surf on. We'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.